So, I had a couple of thoughts here that I wanted to share about the evolution of sexuality. I had a couple of thoughts here, which is to say that sexuality has to do with the relationship over time between the small and the large. And for me, the originary paradigm of sexuality is the bacterium and the virus. The large bacteria and the small virus. Now, bacteria, this is back 3 billion years ago, 2 billion years ago, right in there. Bacteria invent asexual reproduction. All they have to do is mitotically split. They just split and they make clones of themselves, but that's all they can do is clone themselves. They don't have to die except by accident of circumstance, but there's no morphological death inscribed into the morphology of the bacterial life cycle. Whether it's a thermoplasmic bacterium, which are the oldest, the theory is that they came up out of vents in the Earth's core or in the bottoms of the ocean, or the later bacteria, the cyanobacteria, that invent photosynthesis. They get closer up to the surface of the water and they learn how to use sunlight to cleave CO2 so that they can get the carbon and get rid of the oxygen. They take the CO2 molecule, cut it with the power of sunlight. They take the carbon, they eject the oxygen. Oxygen goes up into the atmosphere and it turns the sky blue. Originally it was a kind of a rusty red color. But then, so you get this thing about viruses. Viruses now come in and they invent sexual reproduction as we kind of know it, because a virus, what it does is it lands on a cell wall and it squirts into that cell RNA or DNA. So I think the virus actually invented the orgasm. This is my guess here. This is a basic primordial proto-orgasm, squirting RNA or DNA into the cell so that it hijacks the cell's nucleus so that the cell then makes copies of the viruses. And then suddenly it spawns hordes of viruses which destroy the cells. And I think biologists are totally wrong that viruses are not living. I think they are living. They've got RNA, they've got DNA, they know how to reproduce, they're intelligent about it, and I'm 100% certain that they're alive. That's wrong, the biological thesis that they're not alive. So now fast forward a bit to, let's say, to the Cambrian epoch, which is 570 million years ago, and I see the history of the Earth as a battle between arthropods and vertebrates. In the Cambrian period, the arthropods are the largest creatures. We have Anomalocaris, which is a 3-foot-long monstrosity preying on little tiny trilobites. And all the other creatures can be held in the palm of the hand during the Cambrian. And we see the first fish coming in. We see the transformation of the first worms, which flatten their geometry in a planar way, and they become the first fish, Hycoichthyes. They invent a primitive notochord, but they're all really small. But the monsters are the arthropods during this period, and the arthropods are preying on all these other little tiny vertebrates. So there's been a struggle between here, once again, the small and the large. We saw with the large bacterium versus the small virus, and now we have the large arthropod versus the small vertebrate in the Cambrian. So this all evolves, and as we get to the Ordovician period, a couple 100 million years later, we get very large cephalopods, which are huge, but we also get 3-foot size sea scorpions, what are called brontoscorpions, and they're enormous, and they're preying on fish. And the fish at this time are small enough to be held in the palm of the hand, and they don't have jawbones. They have round O-shaped sucker mouths, and they're going along just sucking stuff up but these bronto-scorpions are preying on them, capturing them, and eating them until the fish got smart, and they figured this out. They figured out this idea, what if we took one of the gill bones on the side here and shifted it forward to become a jaw bone, which God knows how they figured this out, but they did. So they shifted it forward. They had a jawbone, and once they had a jawbone, they didn't have any teeth yet. It was just serrated. So then they could start eating other creatures. And as they're eating other creatures, they're getting larger and larger and larger. And pretty soon they're rivaling the size of the arthropods, the 3-foot bronto-scorpions. They're rivaling the size of them. So by the time we get to the Devonian epoch, which is about 250 to 300 million years ago, somewhere in there, we get to the Devonian and we get this fish called Mater Piscis. And Mater Piscis, as the name suggests, mother fish, is the first to invent giving birth to live young without eggs. So this is the first fish that has figured out how to just drop a clone of itself out into the water without using eggs. And that is already pointing the way toward mammals and giving live birth. Mammals are creatures who give live birth. They don't lay eggs. The problem with reptiles is they lay eggs, then they wander off, and other predators come along and eat the eggs. So it's not much of an evolutionary advantage. So then we get, by the time of the Permian period, and this is just before the dinosaurs, we get the first what are called reptile-like mammals, where these reptiles begin to appear that have whiskers, and they have fangs, like all reptiles do, whiskers and fur, and they only come out at night. This creature is called a thrinaxodon, and this creature is laying, not laying eggs, but giving birth to live young, just like that tiny fish did at the end of the Devonian, Mater Piscis. And so they're laying or giving birth to live young. And I think that the basis of human emotional interaction comes from this. It comes from this mammalian relationship between the mother nurturing the young, caring for the young, nurturing the young, not some reptile wandering off and leaving eggs to be devoured by other predators, but actually nurturing the young. So these Thrinaxodon guys they're onto something. They're onto the future. So they create the what's called the mammalian midbrain, the limbic brain, which is where our emotions come from. And the emotional bonding between mother and child, I think, comes out of this. Now, so if we fast forward beyond that, let's say we go all the way down to the Paleolithic. And we think about Christopher Ryan's book, Sex at Dawn. In Christopher Ryan's book, Sex at Dawn, he has this thesis that sex was originally communal, which means that everybody could participate in fucking. Everybody could get together, let's say, like some of our porn videos that we watch today, they could get together around a woman. They could all take turns coming into her, one guy after the next, which makes a certain amount of sense because it explains why women can have multiple orgasms. And it also explains, according to Christopher Ryan, the shape of the penis with a mushroom head on it that is designed to create a suction as it pulls out. It creates a suction that pulls out the previous guy's semen. So there's some truth to this, I think. But the Paleolithic that he's talking about is the lower Paleolithic, like way lower. We're talking about 2 million years ago. This is going way back. If this went on, and I suspect he's probably right, if this went on, it was like 2 million years ago. When you get to the upper Paleolithic of 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, that's just not happening anymore because what we have now are status burials. And for the first time, we begin to see burials. We begin to see Paleolithic man burying his dead with reverent carving of mammoth ivory beads and jewels, and buried with a wife or two or three. They're all buried together. And this is an age, this is the upper Paleolithic, not the lower, the upper Paleolithic, when the guy that can bring down the biggest mammoths is the guy who gets 2 or 3 wives. So that's the upper Paleolithic. So I think Christopher Ryan's book does not account for this. It simply does not. It only applies to the lower Paleolithic. But now we have this problem. And here's the thing that interests me about the capacity for the expansion of the human brain. How big can it actually get? Well, the problem has to do with the size of how much the vagina can accommodate an expanding cranium that keeps getting bigger and bigger. The bigger the cranium gets as it tries to get through the vaginal canal, the greater the danger is to the woman to die in childbirth, or even for the child coming out to die. That's a big problem. I remember when I was married and I was with my ex and we had a kid, that it was a huge problem. She was in labor for 14 hours, and as the kid was coming out of her, I remember seeing his he was crowning out of her vagina, and his head was too big to fit. It just would not come out. She's lucky she didn't die in childbirth, because I think that if it had been 100 years ago, she would have. And they were about to use forceps to pull the head out, which is dangerous because if you use forceps, it risks damaging the skull. So they didn't do that, but they kept coaxing her and coaxing her and coaxing her, and the head would not come out. It was huge until finally she gave one last heroic push, and it did come out. So we got lucky, and the kid came out without any damage to his brain. But that made me think about some things with regard to where we're at with how large the human brain can be. How large the human brain can be. Once again, we have this relationship between the small and the large. We have this relationship between an expanding brain that gets larger and larger as the frontal lobe builds up on top of the reptilian brainstem, the mammalian brainstem, and now we have the neocortex, which builds up on top of that. And as it expands, the vagina has to expand also to accommodate that, which is interesting because in sexual intercourse, men, of course, prefer very tight vaginas. It facilitates insemination. It facilitates coming. But on the other hand, at the other end of the cycle, with the head coming out, you're dealing with the problem of now it has to be loose and wide and open. The hips, I do know, shift a bit. The hips do shift a bit to accommodate. There is some widening that the body knows how to do naturally, but still, there's a limitation about the size of the vagina and what it can accommodate as far as the head coming out. And I think that there's a limit on human intelligence and how large the brain can be, how big the skull can be, and I have a suspicion even that we have already reached it. We're at the point where we're as large as human intelligence can be accommodated for based on the size of the vaginal canal, and it can't get any wider than it already is. So we're at a point in human evolution where what we've got to work with is what we're stuck with. I don't think it's going to get any larger. So anyways, these are just thoughts that I had, like notes in a notebook, and I just thought I would share those with you.